Hello and welcome to my full bookshelf. Today I'm doing a slightly different video. I've asked on Instagram, my Instagram name is @myfullbookshelf, all one word, what books you wanted to read, and since I've read quite a lot of books in my life, I thought if you're a little bit stuck, if you don't know what to read, if you want a recommendation for somebody you love that doesn't necessarily read that much, I would help. So I have about 8 or 10 requests, and I'm going to go through them. So the first one was, I like the themes and settings of classic Gothic novels, but I find the language so hard. Anything Gothic-y that is a bit easier or quicker to read? I quite like this one because I do completely understand the feeling of being a little bit stuck when it comes to wanting to read a book that sort of transports you to a certain time and that makes you feel a certain way, that has some topics that are discussed, but at the same time the language used by many authors during those times is completely different from the kind of language that we use at present time. My recommendation for this question would be The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. So this book has a very sort of Gothic-y feeling, but at the same time the language is more contemporary. I'm not saying that it's written exactly as any book would be written right now. It still does have that sort of feeling of a bit ancient language, because obviously it's set back in the 1800s, 1893. So the language spoken by characters reflects the time in which the novel takes place. The premise to this novel is that the main character, her name is Cora Seaborn, she's married and she has a son, and her husband dies. Since the husband dies in her life, she takes a little bit more charge in her life, and she decides to go to the countryside together with her son and sort of explore the countryside. As she is in the countryside, she comes across the legend of the Essex Serpent, and from there she decides to take on sort of this quest to figure out what the Essex Serpent is. I have bought this book for a friend as well, because she was exactly feeling the same way. She sort of wanted to read something Gothic-y, but at the same time not something as heavy as it can be as reading a classic. So I would definitely recommend this one. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think for part of it, no, I didn't listen to the audiobook, I just read the entire thing. But I've heard that the audiobook is also quite good. The second question that I got, second request that I got, was something magical, dreamy fiction. And for that, I have the perfect recommendation. Now, I know that the person who sent this message hasn't read this book, so I think this is absolutely perfect. And if she hasn't bought it, maybe I'll buy it. The book is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I picked up this book from a street library, I think, not expecting much of it. I had seen it on BookTube and I had seen it on Bookstagram quite a lot, but I never really looked into the plot or the blurb for this book. I'm really glad I didn't, because if you just read the blurb, I don't know, personally I'm not particularly attracted by this kind of books. I'm just going to read from the back of the book. The circus arrives without warning, no announcement preceded. It is simply there when yesterday it was not. So the Night Circus is the location where the majority of the book takes place, although not every scene takes place in the Night Circus. The Night Circus is something that has been created with magic, and at the center of the story there is a sub-story which is sort of like the connecting feature throughout the book, which is some sort of magic tournament, magic skill tournament between two characters, Marco and I genuinely forgot her name. Marco and Isabella, I think? I genuinely cannot remember the name of the female character. It's a great story. It's a very atmospheric book, and while the storyline is important, what I found about this book that was particularly nice to read was the style of the language. So the prose is just simply beautiful to read, but also it's very, very atmospheric. So you can read it and, you know, it's 2020, you're reading it on your sofa, you're reading it on the tube or something, but at the same time you go back to the 1800s, you go back to this weird feeling of, you know, going to a circus for the first time and eating some sweets. It really makes you hungry as you read it. So, great book. Pick it up if you're looking for something dreamy, mystical, that transports you to a different world. I love the next one. I literally just read it. I'm like, I feel you, I feel you. Next one is Quarter, full stop, Life, full stop, Crisis, full stop, I need direction, full stop. Right, if you haven't gone through a quarter life crisis, but you are in that age range, all my congratulations. I've had quarter life crisis, or you know, the equivalent of that, whatever you want to call it. And yes, it is hard, and it's hard to sort of lose direction in a way. I've had that when I was about to move to the UK. It's been now over 6 years I've been in the country, but before that I was living in the Netherlands, and I remember the feeling of living in a country that I had called home for 3 years and having to move back into my parents' place for 2-3 months during the summertime. In the meantime, I was about to move to London, so I moved out of the Netherlands in July, and in September I moved to the UK. So during those months I was back at home with my parents, feeling really weird because I hadn't lived with them for 3 years, and I was really scared of what was coming because I was moving to a country that I had never lived in, where I didn't know anyone, and I was trying to, you know, pursue a career that is not necessarily one of the easiest careers to pursue. Luckily everything went well, but I think part of that is also because I read this book. And before I show you what it is, it's a book and it's written in English. The author is American, and I really liked, unfortunately, the author. And I was on holiday with my parents in a tiny village. I think total number of people who live there is 780 or something like that. Less than 1,000 people live there. Nobody speaks English. You can walk into a 5-star hotel there. I don't even know whether there is one, but you know, the nice hotels, nobody will be able to speak English. It's really rare to find somebody who speaks English in the street. So I was incredibly surprised to find this book in a pile of books that were there for €1. And this was in the middle of summer when I had moved back with my parents, as I was about to move to a different country where I didn't know anyone or anything. And then this popped up in my life and I read it, and that is Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain. Now you'll be a little bit confused because yes, it is indeed called Kitchen Confidential, and as you can see from the picture, come on focus, yeah, there you go. As you can see from the picture, it has to do with Anthony Bourdain's sort of introduction to the cooking world. But this book offers really a snapshot of what Anthony Bourdain's life was when he was in his 20s and when he had himself lost direction. And you know, maybe back then they didn't use the phrase quarter life crisis, but this is what was happening to him. I would definitely recommend reading this book because it gave me a sense of hope, and it gave me some sort of that extra push to be a little bit more the way I always wanted to be, sort of a little bit more fearless, because worst case scenario, you do it all over again. And I mean, his life was very hard in a way. There is a lot of talk about abuse of substance as well, so if you've struggled with that in the past and maybe you don't want to read about that, this is probably not the book for you, but it really helped me at a time in my life when I wanted a little bit of direction and hope, and this definitely delivered. The next request, something about the First or Second World War, but not boring and not so absurd it feels fake. So this question I particularly love because I love reading historical fiction. Eventually I had to narrow it down, but I couldn't bring myself to pick just one. So I picked 2 books. First one is Atonement by Ian McEwan, and this book is set in the UK for the majority of the book, and it follows the story of 2 sisters. One is called Cecilia and the other one is called Bryony. Bryony is the youngest sister and Cecilia is the oldest sister. They live in this beautiful manor in the English countryside before the Second World War, and another character becomes part of the story. His name is Robyn. Robyn and Cecilia, you discover quite early on in the book that they have some sort of affinity to one another, but then Bryony discovers them behaving in a very adult way that can get quite confusing for a child to understand. and from then on the story sort of spirals, and we see the characters, how they deal with life throughout the Second World War. If I say anything more, it's going to spoil the plot, so I'm not going to say anything else. There is a film that is very, very in line with the book. I would recommend you read the book first and then watch the film, but if you have already watched the film, I would still recommend you read the book. But it does give you an idea of what it does give you an idea of what life was like in the UK during the Second World War, especially if you were a woman. But it also gives you a tiny, tiny idea of what it was like maybe to be a man on the front line during the Second World War. The second book that I want to recommend for somebody who wants to read about the Second World War, but at the same time they want something quite realistic, just in the case like Atonement, The Nightingale offers a nice, fairly realistic story on what it was possibly like to be a woman during the Second World War, in this case in France mostly. So while in Atonement you see the other side of the war, you see the Allied powers sort of side. In this case you see the side of a country that has been taken over by Nazi powers. So I think together those two books gives you a fair idea of what it could have been like in a part of Europe, because it would be way too much to encompass the entirety of Europe or the entirety of the world during those years. This book follows the lives of two sisters. Right now I cannot remember the name of either of them, but they have very different approaches to life. One is slightly older, she's a mother, she's a wife, she has a certain approach to the world that might seem at first glance a bit more passive compared to her sister, who is a bit younger, a bit more reckless. She doesn't have any family ties and she decides she wants to fight in the resistance. You see how both lives are affected in extremely different ways throughout the occupation, and you see how each of them somehow finds a way to help. I'm not going to say anything else because, just like in the case of Atonement, if you say more and you already know how history has played out, then you end up spoiling the book. But this is really good, really nicely written, just like Atonement, and in both cases the books are very believable and very real, and while obviously they are fictional stories, a lot of research has gone into both of them. The next question is, I only speak English and I read mostly English-speaking authors. Broaden my horizons. So I tend to read quite a lot of authors in translation or in original language. Some are translated better than others in some languages than others, but I do feel like if I want to recommend something that is by an author who's not from an English-speaking country, then I would definitely say read these books, which are the Neapolitan Quartet by Elena Ferrante. As you can see, these copies are in English, because the English translation is absolutely fantastic. These are translated by Ann Goldstein. I actually once watched a panel with her and she was incredibly interesting, and it's fascinating to hear how she talks about the relationship between language in translation and the actual work that the author has to do behind the scenes, especially with an author like Elena Ferrante. We still don't know who she is. Her identity has never been revealed. This is just a pseudonym. So the work of the translator in the specific case really has to be fairly independent from the author, but at the same time, with books like this that are written not even in Italian but they're written in dialect, it's even more complex, and trying to figure out all the nuances of the language becomes really complex and really hard. But at the same time, I think she does an incredible job. I've read the books both in English and in Italian. I can say these are almost the same thing. That being said, let's move on to discussing about these books. Sorry, I'm putting them away. Let's move on to talking about these books. So it's a quartet, so there is a total of 4 books, and the first one is My Brilliant Friend. Now you will see the cover itself is very unusual. There is a whole story as to why the covers look like this. Now I think after the HBO series has come out, they have been changed to being a little bit more in line with the series in terms of having maybe the characters that play the actors that play the characters on the cover. But these are the original covers and they all look very odd. there is a whole reason why the covers are like this, and I'm not going to spoil it for you, but if you manage to find the discussion about this at the London Italian Literature Festival from what year was it? 2018. I was there. It was so interesting. Do find it. I think it should be on YouTube somewhere. Moving on to the actual plot of the story. The stories follow the lives of Lila and Elena. Elena is the narrator throughout the 4 novels. Lila is sort of this best friend character. They have a very controversial relationship. It's some sort of love-hate relationship. There is a lot of competition going on between both of them, but they also come close and come together and help each other in moments of need. There is a lot of talk about what's good and what's bad. There is a lot of talk about what's expected from you as an individual in society, and you really see how these are set in Italy, and most of them are set in Naples during the sort of post-Second World War period when the country was sort of trying to rebuild itself. So it's the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. It's a really strange time for women to be in a country like this, because they obviously had a great contribution to life and society during the Second World War, but at the same time they find themselves in contexts like Naples especially, that are the sort of regress back into what they were before the war and before they had to become sort of the head of the family. You do see the difference between Elena and Lila. They conduct very different lives, they have very different characters. Their character development is incredibly different, but the novels themselves, they really give you an idea of what was it like to live in Italy during those years. And while I'm Italian, obviously I haven't lived through those years, but I had a chat with my grandmother, who is from the south of Italy, and she was a girl at the same time they were girls, maybe a little bit earlier actually. But yeah, she thinks it's a very sort of representative novel, series of novels to be precise. So I would definitely say, yes, pick this up. If you want to read something that is not based in an English-speaking country and that is not written by an English-speaking author, pick them up. But the key reason why I'm recommending this is because the translation is absolutely stunning. The next question is, I want to travel, but I obviously can't leave my house. Corona. How can I do that? I've got 2 books. These are 2 of my favourite travel writing pieces in book form. First one is by Paul Theroux, and this is The Great Railway Bazaar. Yes, the surname is the same as Louis Theroux, is his dad, and this is the journey that he undertook in the, I want to say the 70s? I can't remember. This is the story of Paul Theroux's travel, trip, journey, adventure from London Victoria Station to Tokyo Central Station. Now you would think, oh, did he just fly? No, he did that by train. Literally took a train from London and managed to arrive all the way to Japan. And this is a story of how he approached the journey, what trains he was on. It's quite nice because each chapter is about a different train that he boards. And then obviously he has to come back as well, so he talks about the return trip, and the return trip I think it's a return trip on the Trans-Siberian, and that is one of my, you know, bucket list kind of thing that I want to do. But it's very insightful, and also it talks about the people he meets and the conversations he has, and obviously you can expect a journey like that. Not all the conversations are in English, not all the conversations can be translated, and sometimes it's just a matter of offering a cup of tea on a train or being able to wash your face together with somebody else. So this is one of my favourite pieces of travel writing of all time. A second favourite when it comes to travel writing pieces is Tracks. And I read this just before the film came out in 2014. I remember I was going through a really stressful time in my life. I was writing my dissertation for my undergraduate degree, and I had taken on a project way too big of what I should have, but it went well. I won a prize for it. But that being said, I'm really proud of it. That being said, this book is the real life journey of Robyn Davidson. Now, not many people know who she is. She is a writer, contributor for National Geographic a few times, adventure, explorer, woman who knows how to make her way into the world of adventures. in the 1970s or 80s. I can't remember the year, but Robyn Davidson decided to walk the entirety of the outback from here into the sea. I think it took her about 6 to 9 months, something like that, and she approached the journey completely on her own. The only sort of support and human contact that she had, other than Aboriginal people that she met along the way, was this photographer, Rick Smollen, and he's the one who took the pictures to go with the National Geographic piece. I absolutely love this book because it's very, as you can expect, obviously it tells a lot about the journey itself, about the struggle of having to literally walk, I think it's 6,000 miles, 9,000 miles, something like that, on your own, just with your camels and your dog, and sort of thinking about stuff the entire time because you're on your own for the majority of it. And it's very introspective, and it really says a lot about what it must feel to be alone for so long, but also the sense of accomplishment of following a dream, because really nobody asked her to do this. It was not something that had to be done. It was not something particularly, I don't know, it was not a challenge that somebody had posed for her. It's a challenge that she posed herself, and she decided to undergo. And I don't know, I felt this book was really empowering and also gave me a sense of direction at a time when I really needed that. The next book recommendation is sort of on a very similar note, because the question or the request is, I need to have faith in humanity. I've lost it all. This pandemic is getting me down. I feel you. I think this pandemic is feeling quite hard for everyone. Moving on from the topic of pandemic, let's move into the topic of restoring faith in humanity. And for that, I have the perfect book, because it put me in such a good mood. It made me want to be nicer. And that book is The Kindness of Strangers, which is a collection of essays and real stories by Lonely Planet writers, and it's edited by Don George, just like the majority of Lonely Planet books. So I was reading this book when I was traveling on my own, and it gave me such a good feeling, because obviously traveling on your own when you're a woman, when you're young, might not be particularly easy or particularly safe. There have been certainly situations in which during my solo travels I felt unsafe, but this book really made me feel a little bit better about taking my chances and, you know, maybe doing that one thing that I'm a little bit intimidated to do when I'm traveling. It is a collection of stories by Lonely Planet travel writers of how strangers have sort of come together and helped them in moments of need, but also showed them how you can literally create boundaries, you can literally create bonds with people even though you're not from the same culture, you don't speak the same language. So I would definitely recommend this if you need that sort of cuddly feeling kind of book. It is not a novel, it is not fiction, but since it's fairly short stories, I think the longest is 20 pages or so, maybe not even. You can dip in and out whenever you need it. So if you want to read a novel as the main book that you're reading that week or that month, absolutely fine. And then, you know, dedicate a few moments of your day to reading a chapter or two of this, and just give you that sort of warm feeling and hope that things will get better. The next question is, I would like to read a romance that makes me cry. Now, I've spoken about Atonement, I've spoken about The Nightingale, I've spoken about many other books today. Many of those may make you cry when you read them, but when I read this question, I knew I had to recommend one specific book. That specific book is David Nicholson's One Day. I don't know if you can see, there we go, you can see it here. One Day follows the story of two main characters. One is Emma and one is Dexter. And the story is narrated in an interesting way. That means that you don't see a story happening day by day or month by month. You see it happening once a year for one day only, every year for about 20 years. It starts in 1988 on the 15th of July, which is Sanswithin's Day. I think I might be saying it wrong. But anyway, and you see the 15th of July being repeated throughout the book. Dexter and Emma, I'm not spoiling anything because it's literally the first chapter. They go to the same university, they graduate, they stay out all night, and then it comes the early hours of the morning and they decide to hook up. So Emma asks Dexter to go back to her place, they go back to her place, and then they sort of decide that it's better to just fall asleep and potentially be friends. And from there, this sort of friendship touches upon different aspects of being friends, but being potential lovers, being lovers, and all that. The reason why I say read this because it's a romance is because it is a romance, and in my opinion you can see romance in many different ways. You can see romance as a love story between a man and a woman, or two women or two men that sort of leads towards the relationship, or you can see a love story also between friends and how the friendship evolves. I think this encompasses both. And the make you cry aspect is, if you haven't watched the film, please don't watch it before reading the book, read the book. But this really makes you cry at different points in the book, but then obviously whoever has read it knows exactly when you just start bawling out your eyes and start ugly sobbing. The next request is, I would like something for my younger cousin in teens. She wants to move from YA to adult fiction, but smoothly. I was never particularly a fan of young adult fiction, so I don't necessarily know how to answer the question in the best possible way. One thing I know is that the book that I'm currently holding in my hands, and that I haven't revealed just yet, is probably one of my favourite books of all time. I think it's written in a beautiful way, and I think the author had originally thought of making this book a young adult novel. It turns out that young adults and children like it so much, regardless of who it was originally thought for. And the book that I'm talking about is The Book Thief. There is a book also for this one. The book is a million times better. The cover might give away what the topic is. You have a young girl and you have death. And the thing that I particularly love about this book is that death is the narrator of the story, and you see how death is related to this little girl during a time that is particularly difficult, because it takes place during the Second World War. It takes place in a rural German town, and she is adopted into this German family of slightly older mother and father figure, but she knows her father and she knows her mother. Her father is dead, and her mother sort of goes missing or gives her away, but never sort of returns. Again, I'm not spoiling anything. You know from the very beginning what's happening because you see it. As you can imagine, there is a lot of death being described in this book. So it's not an easy read, but at the same time it's written in a really almost playful way that is very respectful of the time, of the characters, and everything that's happened actually in real life. Because, you know, during the Second World War, people were exterminated. Death was a reality for everyone. It's very hard to find one person that hasn't been touched by the Second World War events, whether that's somebody who was fighting on the front, whether it was on the right front or the wrong front. It's a different story. But it's very hard to go into the 1940s and find somebody who hasn't suffered a loss of some kind. So I think this book is very respectful of that, and I think it's a good sort of, if you're moving from something that has a fairly quick plot and characters are very relatable and very strong, this is a good move towards adult fiction. At the same time, I feel like it might not be fully adult fiction, but it's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. So yeah, that brings me to the end of this video. Thank you so much if you've stuck around to see whether I mentioned your recommendation or not. I hope you enjoyed my recommendations, and if you were one of the people asking for these books, have I suggested something that you are actually going to be picking up, or have you already read that and do you want a different one? And if you would like to see more of this kind of videos, please do let me know. Leave a little comment down below. Not many people leave comments, although people watch it, so leave a comment or put a thumbs up, and don't forget to please subscribe, because I would like to see this channel a little bit, you know, in a better shape. Grow, like, subscribe. I feel like one of those teenage boys just asking to subscribe to something. Enough. Bye!